Through a void of nothingness, Charlie could see a light in the distance, like a blue twinkling star. The soles of his feet felt no earth, yet his steps brought him closer and closer to it. There was no sound at first, not even his breathing, and he was breathing. How was he even walking without pain? What did it really matter? This empty dark was a relief compared to where he was going, even if he was laying next to Ruby, hearing her laugh. There was nothing now. No fear, no concern for himself or anything else. Nothing. And nothing was better than what little something his life had amounted to. He was neither cold nor hot, comfortable or strained, calm or afraid. He was as much nothing as the world was around him. Yet that light was something. It was neither interesting nor mundane, lovely or abhorrent, but he kept moving towards it with a stride that seemed not entirely his will. Had he a will, he wouldn't know it. He was pointless, worthless, yet he and the distant light were the only two things existing on this plane. Why not continue on? Said a faint thought. Why not? Charlie agreed aloud. It's not like I have anything better to do. His voice wasn't his harsh, gravelly replacement, the one they had so graciously given him. What were they anyway? It didn't matter. Neither was his voice the one that he had sang with. Who was that again? It didn't matter either, he supposed. All voices heard here were no louder than thought, and they seemed to fade out of memory as though they had never been spoken. The light went from the size of a pin to a speck, to a dot, to a pupil of someone with silver eyes. There was something akin to a breeze, or the sensation of a breeze, or the idea of a breeze, he supposed. May have been the sound of water, a whisper, a taste of saliva in his mouth. The light was the size of a marble now, like what he'd used to play with Frankie at the end of Henpin Street. With that memory came a laugh. He was a boy, back against the wall of bones and mortar, cigarette in his mouth. The street was a beating heart. The cars were cells running to and fro, while he stood idle, waiting his turn to flick the black sphere into the crowd and scatter them abroad. He'd win this bet. He knew all the tricks. He would get that kiss from Ruby. The light was now a basketball, swishing through the net of tangled hair. Cheap. Ellisboro really had a lousy court. You would have thought that a town built around one of the most prominent processing plants in the country could afford a better goal. So cheap, yet the kids devotedly played every weekend. Sometimes the parents would watch, faceless, hairless forms, sitting quietly in the stands while Caesar kissed Ruby beneath the south side goal. Charlie sauntered over to her parents and sat in between them, their mangled arms embracing him around the shoulders. It's all right, kid. We understand. The light was now his mother's swollen belly, pregnant again. They had to pay their debt somehow. If only the Latchers were just a little more patient. Oh yeah, that's what they were called. With that thought, Charlie's next step landed in cold liquid. Clear, pure. He stopped and looked down to see a form writhing about beneath the ripples. He watched as the liquid calmed and he could see a young face. His face. What was he doing down there? He reached down towards himself, and likewise, his image reached up, and their hands clasped together in the cold pool. Charlie pulled his image, and it came up to meet him. "Thanks, man," the other Charlie said. His raspy words were loud and echoey, as if they came from the light. "Thought I'd never get out of there. Phew. Limbs are freezing, especially my foot." "About that," responded the dry Charlie. his words a faint, lovely whisper, an aspect of better things, or at least the idea of better things. Yeah, I know. You went and sliced it off. Hey, man, at least you put it to good use, right? Right, Dry Charlie said, feeling saddened by the jest. It wasn't as though he wanted to do this to his counterpart, but what other choice did he have? Marlowe was a good guy. He knew how to fix someone up that was short on plaz. Wet Charlie was indeed low on plaz, low on luck, low on cigarettes, low on love, full of heartache. About that, Wet Charlie croaked. Yeah, I know. Caesar was Ruby's man, not us. She was just an invitation to heartbreak, man. I'm sorry I dragged you into it. Don't mention it. It's just as much my fault as yours. More so mine. After all, I've got the wealth, not you. No offense, but that's not what I was gonna say. The light was now the size of a dartboard. Caesar's aim was off. A double followed by 2 off the board. I want to marry her, Charlie, mumbled Caesar through the pain of his pulled teeth, but she doesn't want to leave town. Charlie scoffed at his opponent's turn as he readied his own. Well, who would with you, he said, feeling bad for the response. He wondered if he was simply mocking his friend's lack of game, or his predicament with Ruby's stubbornness. Either way, Caesar was out of luck. He'd be processed tomorrow. What were you gonna say? Asked Dry Charlie, now shivering from the ice water on his feet as they submerged in. The light was the size of the clock that was set in the bone archway of the bus station's entrance. The latchers were dead. Charlie, soaked in their filth, waited nervously for any bus out of Ellisboro. He blended in with those getting off their shift at the plant. That is, until he felt 2 arms curl around his side. It's all right, kid. We understand. No, they wouldn't have understood. How could Charlie have told them that Ruby's eyes were taken? That despite everything they had given to ensure otherwise, they had failed. They'd have to go home and watch their baby cry with those black marbles, knowing that it was all for nothing. He had to run. He had to steal a car and go. It was the best thing for Charlie, Ruby, and them when he was gone. The law would be after him, and they could get relief for a while, now that their debt collectors were out of the picture. Would there be more? Sure, but just a little relief is better than nothing at all. A little relief is something. I was gonna say that we are that little something, Charlie. The light was now a cloudless sky that hung above the 2 Charlies who stood in the middle of a rippling mirror. Let me show you, rasped the Wet Charlie. There was the sound of a siren, red and blue lights, a street rushing by around him, an undulating form in the distance, now taking the place of the light, growing closer and closer, but not fast enough. Never fast enough. There were people sopping up the puddles of Caesar's blood, wringing it out into buckets, bottles, cans. They would want more. Ruby had to stop them. The ambulance roared as it sped towards the crowd. Janice, her partner, was screaming in her ears, trying to stop her. Ruby kept on, gnashing the inside of her mouth, tasting her own blood. The crowd disappeared only when it was nearly too late. Ruby heard screams all around her as she knelt down by the lifeless form of Caesar. She wanted to roll him on his back and begin chest palpitations, but she knew he was too broken to be moved by anything like that. She got up and ran to the back doors of the ambulance and began pulling out the stretcher, calling her partner to help her. Ruby could hear the crowd gathering around her, mumbling to themselves whether or not they should just rush the paramedics and take the plaz that they had. Ruby called out for Janice again as the stretcher came crashing onto the pavement, but she never came around to help her. After a few minutes, Ruby rounded back where Caesar lay, only to find Janice herself filling up one of the collection bags for lost causes. The crowd also began to rush forward in a tumultuous cry of greed, and Ruby tried to run out in front of them, but was knocked aside. Her face busted against the concrete several times as the people trampled her. Those not close enough to Caesar stood around her, as well as on her. In her rage, Ruby reached up and began to bite down on the heel of a large man pressing down on her wrist. A sudden kick took her out of the world, though. "It's amazing," Wet Charlie said. "The little town she loves so much couldn't have cared less for her when it came down to it." Dry Charlie shook his head. "They were desperate." "True, but what made them that way?" "I didn't make this world, and I suppose you didn't either." Wet Charlie pulled a damp cigarette out of his pocket. "Got a light?" Dry Charlie pulled out a box of matches. "Ain't gonna do you any good." "Yeah, well, it's a thought that counts, am I right?" "No. Any thoughts of helping didn't save Caesar," said Dry Charlie, lighting a match. To Dry Charlie's surprise, Wet Charlie began to draw on a mouthful of nicotine, then blew out in his counterpart's face. "And if you were there, would you have done more than think to help yourself to your old friend?" Dry Charlie exhaled into his trembling hands. "I hope I would have, but I wasn't there." "You're right," snarled Wet Charlie through his teeth. "You weren't there, but I was." Ruby slowly came into the back of the ambulance. The side of her face was wet where her tears had soaked the head of the stretcher. The doors were still open. Night had fallen. A voice hummed softly in her subconscious, and she felt strength in her limbs again. No one was there for her, not even Janice. She was alone in the night, yet there was no fear. There was nothing. Ruby felt a complete numbness as she exited the back of the ambulance and went to where she had found Caesar. The body was gone. Only little remnants of dried blood remained. She turned to go back to the ambulance and drove back to the hospital. She was told when she got there that the people had begun to get violent with one another over the corpse of Caesar, and that the Latchers were called in. Janice was dead, along with many of the crowd. Caesar's corpse had been taken to be processed, and no one was able to keep the blood. Ruby was numb to all of it. She felt neither anger nor sadness. She felt as though she were drifting through a dream, her feet feeling no earth, yet her steps carrying her somewhere. Wet Charlie was smirking to himself as the vision played out. They saw Ruby Brennan tell her parents about what had happened to Caesar, saw Charlie Valentine at her door, leading her to the ring that he had made, saw the Latchers at her door, there to take her eyes, claiming her parents' blood debt for Ruby's tuition was not being met, and they had nothing else to give. "I know all of this," whispered Dry Charlie. "You didn't see it. You ran away from it," Wet Charlie breathed in another draw, then exhaled a pure white cloud, followed by words in a voice as still as the trickle of blood. "You need to see it, Charlie. It's my favorite part." Ruby lay in agony as the tears mingled with fresh blood seeping out of her sockets. It was the first pain that she had felt since Caesar's death. It all seemed to collide at once. She felt her heart break at the thought of her not being able to hold him again, kiss his lips, break his heart. She wasn't going to leave town with him. She had too much that she loved here. Her parents, her job, her school, her friends. She wanted to pay back everything she owed, not just run away from her obligations. The taking of her eyes was the beginning of that responsibility being met, and she could live with it. It was Charlie's voice being taken that she could not. He was always looking out for her, singing for her, writing songs about her. Now he was a criminal. Ruby heard his voice from one of the Latchers that came to collect her eyes, and she knew what had happened, what he had tried to do. Charlie Valentine loved her, and now, being honest with himself, Ruby Brennan realized she loved him as well. She supposed that she always had, though she wanted more than a song. She got it. Charlie gave up what was seemingly prized most about his character, and was now alone to face the wrath of the processors. Ruby realized what she wanted, realized it when she looked upon her parents' mangled forms, holding each other close, sobbing over their daughter. No more. The burden would no longer be theirs. She'd find Charlie. If they had to share the same fate, so be it. That night, she would head out on her own run-down motorcycle, which was hopefully in decent enough shape to catch up with Charlie, and by some miracle, it had been. Wet Charlie flicked away the butt of his cigarette, which created a ripple where it fell. As the effect grew in size, there came a rumbling beneath. Dry Charlie was shivering violently as the water began to lap at his legs. So cold. He never thought he could be so cold. In response, his doppelganger began to chuckle a little, slapping Dry Charlie's arm hard like Caesar used to. So that leads us to this point, my friend. You are Ruby's little something in this world of nothing. I'm anxious to see how the two of you fare. Really, I do. Dry Charlie felt himself fall to his knees, the cold water splashing up onto his body, chilling him even more. Only one more thing I wanted to tell you before I go, Wet Charlie said, looking down at Dry Charlie. Only now he wasn't Charlie at all. He was Caesar. He was Ruby. Now his mother and father. He had no form anymore, just a light that Charlie could no longer bear to look at. Nor could he tell if it was the voice of the speaker or if it was the cold water engulfing him. Endure. Charlie woke with a scream as hands grabbed at him, forcing him down onto a cold table. He's alive, Marlowe. This guy's alive. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.